Okay, so we're continuing the milling process that we started with the edge joiner. We've got this piece of material that we've jointed one face so it's absolutely flat and there's no twist in it. And then we jointed an edge of the board to be completely square to the jointed face of the board. Now to continue the milling process, we're going to put this through the thickness planer. It's a tool that we're going to be working on here. And that's going to enable us to reduce the thickness of the material so that it's absolutely parallel to the original jointed face. The way this tool works is, whereas the jointer, when we were passing the material over, had an outfeed table and an infeed table, and the cutter head was located below the work, when we pass the material through the thickness planer, we're passing it over a bed with rollers on it that's adjustable up and down underneath a fixed rotating head. Okay, so we're going to be passing against the rotation of the head. There's power feed rollers in front of the cutter head. You have the cutter head, and then you have a power feed roller here, so that when you feed the material into the machine, the power heads are actually dragging it through the machine for you, so you don't have to stick your hands underneath that rotating cutter head. Now the safety aspects of this tool are the same as the safety aspects of just about any power tool. You always have to have your safety glasses on, okay? Because it will kick material out at you even though you have your dust collection chute on and it's sucking the sawdust up the chute. You also have to make sure that your work area is clear and that nobody's behind you in case you do get a kickback. So I'm going to show you how this tool operates by adjusting the depth of cut, turning the tool on and off, and feeding the material. We're going to continue the milling process that we started with the edge and face joiner by using the thickness planer. I'm going to show you some of the aspects of the tool. We've got our board that we edge jointed and face jointed in the joiner. We make sure we've got an edge that's square to the face. Okay. Now, the thickness planer has a bed on it that when you pass the material over the bed, it passes underneath a cutter head that's located above the bed that determines the thickness of the cut. You can raise and lower this bed. Unlike the joiner that has an in-feed table that's adjustable and an out-feed table with a cutter head in between, this bed is fixed all the way through and it's got a couple of rollers on it to make things easier to roll past underneath the cutter head. So I want to determine the depth of cut by rolling the bed down. The way you do that is by spinning that wheel counterclockwise. You can see the bed lowering there. Okay. The way I determine the depth of cut is by referring to the gauge that's riveted to the side of the machine. It's like a ruler that's riveted here. Right now it's indicating that the bed is 1 inch and 15/16 away from the cutter head. If I measure the thickness of my material, I'll find out that I'm at 1 inch and 9/16 right now. What I want to do is take this material down to, say, 1 inch and 3/8. So we've got to take off 3/16 of an inch. Okay? This machine will remove a 1/16 of an inch of material at a time safely and cleanly, although it can remove up to 1/4 inch at a time. We don't want to do that. We don't want to push the tool. We don't want to ruin the material. Okay? So we're going to readjust the bed up to the thickness, the present thickness of the material, and then we're going to adjust for our first cut from there. So again, we're going to adjust the bed to the present thickness of the material, and then we're going to adjust for the depth of cut. So I unloose the locking knob and I start winding up to the dimension we're at right now, which is 1 inch and 9/16. I check my material along the length of the board to make sure that's what it is fairly consistently. If you have a board that's thicker on one end and you want to reduce the entire thickness to the same thickness, you have to start out with your bed adjusted to the thickest dimension of the board. You don't want to adjust it to the thinnest dimension because it may be anywhere between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch thicker on one end. So we've got a fairly consistent piece of material here that we want to surface. So we, again, We're at 1 9/16". We've adjusted the bed to 1 9/16". Now we're going to take off a 1/16 of an inch cut. That's 1/2 of a turn of this wheel. It's a 1/16 of an inch. We lock it down so it doesn't move. And then when it's time to turn on the machine, we've got our on and our off switches here. So just like any other power tool, first thing you do is put your safety glasses on, especially if you're crouched down in front of this machine with the cutter head rotating in this direction. If there's any chips or debris in that chute right now, and you turn the machine on while you're down here at eye level, you may get something coming out at your eyes. So always make sure you have your safety glasses on. Okay? So we're going to turn the machine on now and take our first pass. We're going to put the rough side up. We've already jointed the smooth face. The smooth face goes down. The rough side is the edge we're going to machine. So here we go. Flat on the bed, okay, and feed the material. Don't follow it in with your hand. Make sure you've got no loose clothing that'll get caught between the board and the bed, or you'll get sucked into the machine also. Okay, so now every time this piece of material comes out of the machine, for every pass that you make, you want to make sure that you check the thickness. Okay, we've got a gauge on the machine that's telling us, okay, we're cutting to 1.5 inches or 1 9/16". But the only way that you're going to tell what you really have there is by checking the thickness yourself. So as the material comes out of the machine, you might be walking it around to the other side. You want to check to see exactly what you've got. Okay, because the machine or the gauge may be mismatched, and you may not be getting exactly what you think you're getting. So if you're doing precision work, you always want to be checking your thickness. And you probably want to check your thickness down the length of the board in several places, and be precise about it so that you can make the appropriate adjustments on the wheel for the depth of cut. Now sometimes you'll be taking a half turn. If you want to take less than a 1/16 of an inch off, you might only take a quarter turn, pass the material through, and check it as you're walking around to the front to take your next pass. Now it's good practice when you're putting the material through. If you have to take off more than 3 or 4 passes, or more than 2 passes actually, you want to flip that material from side to side as you pass it through the machine. As the wood dries out, if you've got any surface moisture, if you took only one surface off, you'd be digging down into a real moist surface, and then you'd be leaving a real dry surface. And as the moist one began to dry out, you'd get some shape develop into your board, and then you would have negated all of your milling procedures in order to get a nice flat square edge board that you can pass through some other milling machines and make your project out of.